Hi there, I'm Kevin Benedict, Senior Vice President of Solution Strategy here at Regalix. And this week, we're reporting live from SAP's Customer Experience event called CX Live 2018 in Barcelona, Nir.
It's amazing.
Yes, and let me introduce my guest today. My guest is Wall Street Journal bestselling author Nir Eyal.
Thanks for having me, Kevin. It's great to be here. Appreciate it.
So talk to us about what you're doing here at the SAP conference.
So I just gave a talk on my book, Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products. It's a book about, there it is, it's a book about how do you create experiences that bring people back. A lot of companies out there really struggle with the fact that they're building a product or service that would greatly improve their customer or users' lives if they would only use it. And so that's really what my book is about. How do you create the kind of product that people want to keep coming back to? Looking at the psychology of the most habit-forming products in the world. So the case studies are around Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and WhatsApp and Slack and Snapchat. What is it about these companies? What's the deeper psychology driving habitual usage of these products? In hopes that, my goal isn't to addict people. My goal isn't to teach Facebook and YouTube how to do it. They already know how to do it. My goal is so that the rest of us out there building the kind of products and services that people really want to use, but for lack of good product design don't use. How do you look at those behavioral patterns, those design patterns, and bring them over to your product and service?
I think, quickly I can think of all kinds of companies that went out there and they got tens of millions, hundreds of millions of investment.
Right.
And they struggled to get that hook that would bring customers back, and they failed.
Right. We call those businesses leaky buckets, and we see them all the time, right? The venture capitalists invest millions of dollars, they spend it on marketing, they even go viral, right? They think they're going to have a big success because they're viral, but if you can't keep people coming back, if you can't retain and engage people, then all that money you spent on growth was a big waste of time and money.
Oh wow, and I can, there's so much that we can talk about here, but I was reading the back of your book here and in the inside cover, and there are just so many positive comments from people a lot in Silicon Valley saying this book is very important.
Thank you.
And I can see it's even more important today when there's a subscription economy.
Right.
Because, it's not a one-time purchase anymore. Your whole business is determined by, are the customers going to keep coming back?
Absolutely. So whether it's a consumer-facing product, if you think about a social network, of course, that if a company like Reddit or Facebook or Twitter, or, any of these companies, if they don't keep people coming back, they go out of business. It's an existential threat to the company if you lose your habit. But increasingly, it's not just consumer web. We see this in enterprise product, right? It used to be that enterprise products were bought top down. Well, now they're bought bottom up, where, if you think about Slack, if you think about GitHub, Salesforce, these products were used among the rank and file and then percolated up the enterprise. So if you can't hook people to use that product habitually in the SaaS business model, you will not be renewed. And so you have to figure out long-term engagement.
And I see this as even more important because, as we all know, if you're spending $10 million on a platform, then the entire company from the C-suite down are going to be involved.
Right.
But if somebody at the bottom can pay $75 a month or $150 a month, then from the grassroots up, they can start using it without ever having to go through the approval process.
That's exactly right. And once you get people, once you are hooked into the enterprise, you become so indispensable that people say to their boss, you got to pay for this. Like we have to keep using this, right? That's the story of Slack, the fastest growing enterprise product in history. Free to use in the beginning, but then the more you use it, the more you invest in it. That's one of the crucial four steps of the hook model. Yeah. You start inviting people, eventually you have to start paying. But that's only after the habit has been formed.
Wow, so talk to us about this hooked model that you've been developing here.
Sure, so the hook model has these 4 basic steps of a trigger, an action, a reward, and an investment. And it's through successive cycles through these hooks that our habits form when it comes to products. So a trigger, there are 2 types of triggers. We have external triggers and we have internal triggers. External triggers are these things in our environment that give us some piece of information, a ring, a ding, a ping on your phone that says, hey, check out this app, this website, this product. After that external trigger comes the action phase of the hook. The action is defined as the simplest behavior done in anticipation of a reward. So the very bare bones, simplest thing that I could do to relieve psychological discomfort. We'll come back to that in a minute. Then comes the reward phase, and typically it's a variable reward. There's some kind of uncertainty, some kind of mystery around what I might find the next time I engage with a product.
Anticipation.
Right. So it could be, scrolling a feed. It could be checking a dashboard, and in the enterprise space as well as consumer, going to a dashboard to see what's new with my marketing figures, or what my uptime looks like.
KPIs, how are they lining up? Okay.
Right. Seeing all that data and saying, okay, the numbers are going up and down. That's variability. That's the engine of the hook model. And then finally, the investment is putting something into the product to improve it with use. It's called stored value. So this concept of stored value can be in the form of data, content, reputation, followers, anything that improves the product with use and gets people to invest inside it. So that eventually what we find with these habit-forming products is they don't need those external triggers. Eventually, through successive cycles through these hooks, we begin to associate the product's use with an internal trigger. So what you might have started using because of a notification or an email or some kind of external trigger, eventually you're using it because of a bad feeling. Boredom, loneliness, uncertainty, fear, fatigue. That's what creates this long-term engagement. When you can couple your product's use to some kind of uncomfortable psychological state, that's when the habit takes hold.
So putting on my business cap here, I can think of, maybe that would save money on marketing too, if you're not losing customers through churn.
Right. Because
they've created the habit, they're using it, they're a rock solid customer base.
Huge competitive advantage to forming a habit. One is that it erects huge barriers to entry. If you think about why does Google have 80-90% of the search market, newsflash, they do not have a better search engine. Head-to-head comparisons of Google versus Bing, when people don't know which search engine they're using, it's a 50-50 preference split. People can't tell the difference. But the fact is, the best product doesn't necessarily win. It's who captures the monopoly of the mind. It's the fact that you go to Google and you don't even ask, is there a better search engine out there? How many of us ask ourselves that? So if you can be in the competitive position where people turn to your product and don't even question whether it's the best, that's a huge competitive advantage. Very hard to break a customer habit once it's formed.
Oh yeah, because the brand is associated with what you're trying to do, so Google it.
Right, Google it, exactly. Yeah. And there are many products where customers, they can't be bothered to even question whether they're going to keep using it. It's just become a habit.
Got it. So you talked about the psychological hooks. Mm-hmm. How did you come up with the information behind that? What kind of research were you using?
Yeah, so the hardest part around writing this book was to figure out what to exclude. Because, you can read academic research. It's very dense. It's hard to apply. And, when I was researching this book, I wanted the book that I didn't find. I wanted a book to tell me how to build consumer habits, and I could not find that book in a way that was actionable. I started writing this and doing research. I didn't want to publish a book at first. I was writing it for myself to figure out what I would do next. I started 2 companies. They were both successfully acquired. And so my key goal here in doing this research was to keep this to myself. Now, when I started publishing on my blog, it started getting such good feedback and I saw that it was very helpful to folks, and then I was invited to teach a class at Stanford at the business school. So it became my job today. Yeah. But originally it was because, I had this hypothesis back in 2012 when my last company was acquired. I could see that what was happening in our industry is that as the interface shrinks, so as we went from desktop to laptop, to mobile devices, to wearable devices like the smartwatch, to now audible devices, think about what's happened in terms of the real estate to trigger people. Right? Look at your phone. I guarantee you the apps you use most often are the ones that are on your home screen. Right?
Absolutely.
What happens when that home screen becomes this tiny little interface? Or what happens when it becomes Amazon Alexa or Cortana or Siri and it's a voice interface and there are no external triggers at all? That means that as the interface shrinks and disappears, habits become more important. Look at the skills market for the Amazon Alexa. If you don't remember, if the user doesn't know what to ask for, that skill doesn't exist. Just like an app on your phone on screen 17 doesn't exist for the customer.
Absolutely.
So if you don't form a customer habit, if the customer can't cue themselves to use your product, you might as well not exist.
Wow. So how do you, from a design perspective, early on when you're doing R&D on a product and you're starting to think about the user experience, how do you take those hooks and build them into the design process?
So I get called in two phases. I get called in either very early on when it's just an idea, just a pencil sketch. And that's really why I wrote the book. I wanted to give product people out there a guide. It literally says at the end of every chapter, it says, do this now at the top of the page, where it says, here's what I want you to do step by step to figure out your product's hook. So that's the best place to use this. The other place where I tend to get called in, a lot of times a venture capitalist will call me in and say, we just invested millions of dollars in this company. They had viral growth, everything looked great, and now nobody's stuck around. We're leaking users. It's a leaky bucket. Yes. So they call the plumber. I'm the plumber. Okay. To stop the leaks for these leaky buckets.
Great title there.
Right. And where the hook is helpful there is as a diagnostic tool. We can come in and we can look at the product and say, okay, have we identified the right internal trigger? Is the action easy enough to do? Is the reward fulfilling and yet leaves the user wanting more? And then finally, are we getting the user to invest to make it more likely for them to return? And once you ask yourself those questions, you can diagnose and say, oh, okay, now I get it. This is where my product is deficient. Wow. But the best time to use it is as early as possible.
So you have this whole hook process. I see parts of that brought forward when somebody says we have to add more gamification to hold our customers.
I hear this all the time.
I know. So talk to me, what's the role of gamification?
Generally it's not the answer. If you want the short answer, the answer is gamification is typically not what you want to do. Now I quantify that. Gamification got a lot of attention a few years ago because it had the promise of getting people to do something they didn't really want to do. That's unethical, right? There's a big difference between persuasion, which is what I advocate for, which is defined as helping people do things they want to do, and coercion, which is getting people to do things they really don't want to do. That's a big moral difference. It also is very tough to do, right? Like you can coerce somebody to do something, but as soon as they can get out of doing it, they're going to stop. Much better to figure out how to make an experience that people want to do, not because they have to do it. So if the internal trigger is, for example, something like entertainment, right? Or I'm sorry, like boredom. Yes. Well, then entertainment is a great reward to satiate the itch of boredom.
Right.
Use gamification. Terrific. If the internal trigger is boredom. But what if the internal trigger is workplace anxiety, right? Gamification is not going to scratch that itch, and that's why it's so annoying. That's why it many times when people use gamification, they're basically serving what we call in the industry chocolate-covered broccoli, right? They take something kind of gross, they put something delicious on it, and now they have a big fat mess. Yeah. So only use gamification if it scratches the user's itch. And that's why the internal trigger phase, that first step of the hook, is so important. We have to understand that internal trigger, because if we don't, how can we figure out how to scratch it in the reward phase of the hook?
So Nir, I've seen that same approach by big companies that think that a loyalty program is equal to a gamification. You're going to come back because of the loyalty program. But sometimes I see that I keep getting notifications, mostly from my mobile network operator, that says, "Oh, you've hit another milepost in a gamification mode."
Right.
And I'm like, no motivation.
Meaningless. Right.
Meaningless to me.
Right.
There's no hook in that whatsoever. I was not calling people to get gamified by you. I was calling people to arrange something.
Right. I totally agree. And that's why it's so important to understand those internal triggers. Now, there might be a segment of your user base that does respond to that because they are looking for entertainment. They happen to be bored, and this is a great way for them to entertain themselves. That's not going to be everyone, and so don't spam everybody with your stupid gamification techniques unless you have evidence that shows that it's something that people actually want. So that's why, plopping on gamification without understanding, does it actually scratch the user's itch? Gamification is only good when the internal trigger is boredom.
Wow. So your book, Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products, must have been read by everybody, because now the conversation has swung the opposite. We're all hooked. on different parts of our digital environments, right? Our smartphones. I know almost the first thing I do when I get up in the morning is I need to check the weather app. I need to check to see if there's an email that's screaming at me, and then just kind of check my environment, right?
Right.
What are my friends doing? All those kinds of things. So it's like a pattern. And then I need to get an update on the news, not only the world news, but the business news that's going to impact my world where I'm working at. So I'm already hooked. Now the conversation by Google and by Facebook and others is how do you do that in a healthy manner and purposefully?
Right.
What do you think about that?
So I've been working on this issue for a long time, and one with the ethical implications of how do you apply this stuff for good. There's a section in the book titled The Morality of Manipulation, where I give a framework on how to think about applying this stuff ethically. And I think it's time we all question our habits. Not just with technology, there are so many distracting habits that we have out there, whether it's watching too much television, watching too much sports, drinking too much booze, right? There's lots of things that people do too much of in their lives that really come down to the same basic psychological principles. So the reason I wrote this book is twofold. One, I've started 2 companies. I know how difficult it is to build the kind of product that people use habitually. So that was the first reason. How can we help product makers build the kind of products that people want to use as opposed to have to use? That was the most important reason. The second reason is that when you read the book, you realize, holy crap, this is being done to me. Right? And so I wanted to give people at least a preview of how can you break these habits. And the way we break it is by removing the external triggers, making the action more difficult, delaying the variable reward, and not investing. So, but that's not what the book is really about. Really, the book is I want to raise awareness about these techniques so that we can put them in their place. My next book is titled Indistractable. It will be out in 2019. And Indistractable answers this question that's always fascinated me. Why don't we do what we say we're going to do? Right? We say we're going to exercise, we don't. We say we're going to eat healthfully, we don't. We say we're going to sit down at our desk and do that hard project or prepare for that really difficult presentation we have to give, but we check email. Why don't we do what we know we should? That's what Indistractable is all about. And it turns out that distraction is not a new problem. Socrates and Plato talked about it 2,500 years ago. But the tools have changed. The medium has changed. So what I want to give readers is a way to tackle all distraction. What if you could have the superpower of indistractability? What if you could do everything you said you wanted to do?
Wow.
That'd be cool, right?
It'd be very cool, and I look forward to it. What kind of time frame are you looking at?
So early 2019. It'll be available on Audible first as an Audible exclusive. And then later on it'll be in print, probably 2020. Or the book business moves so slowly, unfortunately.
Yes. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Nir Eyal, I want to thank you so much. I want to thank all of you guys for joining us here in sunny Barcelona today.
Thank you. Thanks so much.